Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of the True Data Ops. I'm your host, Keith Belanger, Field CTO here at DataOps.live and Snowflake Data Superhero. Each episode this season, we have been exploring the topic in the world of AI ready data. If you have missed any of the previous episodes and you would like to visit us at DataOps.live on our YouTube channel, subscribe. You'll get notifications of any new episodes that we publish. My guest today is Peter Chase, Enterprise Account Manager at Catalyst. And the theme for today's conversation is fail to plan, to fail, why data ops best practices matter more than ever. Peter, welcome to the show. Happy to
Thank you,
have
Keith. Nice
you.
to be here.
Yeah. So Peter, for those of you who aren't aware of who you are, give people a little bit about your background, who you are, let us into the Peter world.
The Peter world, my God. Well, I've been in technology all my career. I did a computing science degree in London, and yeah, I'm pleased to have stuck with it, all the way through. I guess some of the things that worth perhaps mentioning are 9 years at the British Broadcasting Corporation, the BBC.
Nice.
And a particularly telling part of that was managing their standard desktop and server deployment team, where you were trying to integrate a whole load of bits of software, some for users to use, but others that manage the whole thing. And we may come back to that as a theme. I've been with software companies. In 2009, I joined one which was a startup and a fledgling user of DevOps, and we got into Git and then proper agile and sprints and all that good stuff. And that was a really big education for all of us, not just me. And then since 2016, I've been in data. I've absolutely been hook, line, and sinker right up to my eyeballs in data. And that's been a journey. Cloud Era was the thing actually back then.
Yeah. That was like a blimp on the radar, right?
it came and went.
Yep. Gone, right? It was like boop, boop.
And it was funny. It's interesting to reflect on why it did that. More of a stayer was Talend, which was also something that the company I worked for at the time used, which was Datalytics, which has an important part in the history of DataOps. We then got into Snowflake, DataOps came along, and more recently I've got much more into AI, also into Qlik and Qlik's platform, QlikView, QlikSense, or QlikSense now, Qlik Cloud Analytics as they call it, which is a really great rival to some other offerings. And it's not something I've come across until the last few years, and I'm actually very impressed with it.
It's funny you bring up, we're in the world of AI and then you're talking about software, and I can remember insert disk 1, insert disk 5, insert
I've got some of those
10, right? We've come a long way. So you've worked in obviously a lot of organizations over time in your what's the most common mistake you're seeing teams make when they first start building data solutions?
Well, I should say actually that the experience I have with Snowflake specifically, and DataOps largely, does span, I've got it listed down, industrial, energy, crypto, would you believe, telco, retail, and government, right? So been around a lot of different types of organizations with all the different sort of cultural differences that they have. But there are some common themes. And actually the first thing that people need to think about, right, is what are they going to use, right? So they need to procure the actual data platforms that they want to work with, right? And too often I see that go wrong because either people focus on too much of the core and not of the peripheral stuff around manageability, governance, and so on. The other thing as well that happens with data, unfortunately, is that people tend to inherit tools by virtue of buying other things. And they sort of like get it given to them as if, well, we've got this bundled in with, other software, and you should just use this. Well, that's not a choice. That's not choosing something. But let's focus on people who have made the very sensible choice of using Snowflake. Even then, despite all of its great features, there are other things to think about, which people don't, perhaps because they don't have experience, right? So they just dive in, and they want to impress people because they want to reassure people that they've made a good choice, right? And they start delivering straight away without necessarily, all of the things that we're going to talk about, right, about how you ultimately need to look back. If only you could see with hindsight, right, what you need to know at the start. That's the thing that we're trying to help people with, right, as partners and as yourselves as DataOps, is try and open people's eyes to where they will be and
Right.
find out for themselves in the fullness of time, right? But if you can help them right at the outset, then that avoids all of the stress that might become something that you need to experience right before you realize, hey, yeah, we should have thought about these other things first. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that temptation to dive in very quickly and do some quick wins, which
If
we'll talk about because you do need to do that.
the business, when I say the business, right, oftentimes the investment into doing, you know, I've always said we're in the business of data and analytics, and that's from an IT perspective, because of the business. We wouldn't be,
Hmm.
if it wasn't for the business, we don't just do it for the fun of it, right? So there's a business has this desire to get value
Yeah.
quickly, and as you said, part of, I guess, my role as an architect and some of us in the industry is like protecting you from what might happen, right? Is
Hmm.
making sure those um, things that we know are going to impact us, right? So it's that finding that balance of how do you get that investment in the value, but at the same time protect yourself from we know what's going to happen, right?
When you're starting out, it's obviously a little seed, or you might be likening it to trying to light a fire, but you don't want the fire to become an inferno. Okay, so and you also you want to start out if you can as you mean to go on, but how do you know what that is?
Right.
People do things. Well, somebody said to me once, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary fix, right? So you
Yeah.
do things on a tactical basis, and you think you'll come back to them later and get them right.
Yeah.
Actually, that's really really hard to do. Um, but where stakeholders come into this, right, is that they generally come to a team that might be doing work with data with a rather cynical view, and this is an unfortunate aspect of our industry.
Yeah.
IT is fabled for its disaster projects, right? And there is unfortunately a prevalent view out there amongst stakeholders, amongst C-level people, and so on and so forth, that IT can blow up in your face and waste a lot of money, right? Now,
Yeah.
they would like to hear from you that you're not going to be one of those, yeah. So you're under pressure straight off, right, to prove them wrong and to give them confidence. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do something quick, which shows value and builds confidence, but you need to choose very carefully what it's going to be, because if you start out with too big a challenge, you won't deliver something very quickly, or it'll be such a lash up, right, that you will have real trouble building on it as a foundation.
So a couple questions from that, kind of two questions put together in one
Mhm.
question here. What do you see are the things that are often sacrificed or skipped? And,
Mhm.
how do they rear their ugly head later on?
I mean, everybody wants everybody has this vision, right? That I'm going to create something great. It's going to be really helpful to the business, and it's going to go into what they call production. Yeah, the live environment. Okay. Do you think about what's gonna have to happen once it is live? Because you're then expecting it to sit there and work day in day out. A data product, as we've come to realize, right, is much more than just about the raw data at the center of the data product. It's also about the confidence and the reliability that business users want to know that they can expect from a data product. So once something's live, it's not the end of the story. You've got to keep it running. You've got to make sure it's delivering the changes to the data, the frequency that it's expected, and you've got to cope with sometimes uncontrolled change that comes from the source. Yeah, where columns get added and all the rest of it. And you've
Yeah.
got to watch out for security. You've got to manage. I mean, the more popular something comes, the more important it is for security to work correctly. So, like any product, there are non-functional requirements, NFRs, right, which
Yeah.
relate to that product, which you need to think about as well, because you want it to be successful, but unless you deal with those NFRs and you think about them fairly early, right, you will ultimately end up with a product that you can't really take to market to the full market potential, if you like, that it deserves. So, yeah, not thinking about those NFRs, I think, is the problem that a lot of people realize that they've created.
And you know what? I think years ago, not too far, when I say
Mhm.
years ago, it could have been just a few years ago, we we kind of normalized it being okay, right? Good enough, right? It was, you talk about the non-functional
Mhm.
requirements, and you're like, something would happen, you're like, oh, so what? 10 records didn't load, no big deal,
Mm.
right? Or, oh, we got that transformation wrong, so we're off
Mhm.
on today's load, no big deal.
Mhm.
The pie chart might be off, the graph might be off, right? I think we got okay with things being good enough. But we're in the AI world today, right? And we like to say good enough data is not good enough for AI. What's your take on that?
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, the whole basis of DevOps, right, is and therefore data ops in the world of data, right, is to have actually a very, very good product, which hopefully, right, is spot on. There's
Yep.
no inaccuracy at all. But to achieve that, you need to start with something simple and then incrementally add to it whilst retaining the same level of quality. That's, I think, isn't that the sort of basis of DevOps, where you get something right and you're pretty sure a professor from a computing science department at Imperial College or whatever would say, I can prove that's correct because it's simple enough to do, right?
Yep.
But as you incrementally add to it, because the business wants more from it, that correctness is more and more difficult to achieve. But if you do it in small steps, so frequent changes, but ones that you've tested in a way that show the quality's retained, right? Then it's funny how time sort of goes by, right? Weeks turn into months, and when you look back at what you've actually achieved with all of these small steps, you've gone that huge distance that somebody in the past would have said, well, the waterfall approach would have got us there, and that would have been the biggest mistake of all, right? Is how to deliver something in that sense, right? Give me 3 months and I'll bring something to you, right? You want to be working with the business and doing that iterative agile thing, right? Um,
Yeah. It,
but yeah,
that kind of brings me to, you being a partner and expert in the industry. How do you see that role, you as that in the organizations, you in influencing them, like playing that role, protecting them, kind of like what's your part as that partner and expertise in the industry?
well, at Catalyst, we have over 300 clients, and a lot of them are in the sort of mid sector, right? They're not huge banks or big pharmaceuticals. They're honest companies without the budgets to have very large technology functions. So there might be really a handful of people, and so we represent a chance for them to have an extension of that, right? Where we have and other partners as well, of course. We have particular specialisms in our areas that we can bring to them that they wouldn't have otherwise for themselves. So as partners, we represent a sort of repository of experience, and sometimes we're able to do a bit of experimentation as well. And I think another thing that we bring is we bring relationships with good technology partners like yourselves, right? So we've got an in with you guys because
Yeah.
we know your CTO Guy Adams and all this sort of stuff, right? Yeah, and we can go and talk to him. Well, we do like to respect certain protocols, but nevertheless, we've got those relationships with you guys so that we can bring something to our clients which they wouldn't really have for themselves, because they don't know you as well as we do. So there's that partnership, as it were, backdoor that we can offer to those clients, as well as the resource extension, if you like, and the skill extension and the experience that we are building for ourselves as we deliver solutions for all these clients.
So how do you introduce data ops? I'm going to say data ops from two
Mhm.
perspectives: data ops as a practice and DataOps.live as a
Yeah,
product
on
into
on Snowflake.
customers um, that might not even be aware of either.
Well, on the first point, right, people at least have pretty much recognized DevOps as a thing. Okay, so if they have any experience of software application development, they recognize the success that Agile and DevOps has brought to the world of software development. And then you say to them, well, yeah, now you're going to be doing some of that, but in a data warehouse uh, environment instead, where there's actually an added dimension that your test data is potentially terabytes in size. And it's not an area in traditional terms that has had the same practices and development standards, right, applied to it as DevOps. So first of all, yeah, we talk about the need for that and how good that would be, because you can see the benefits brought to software application development. Then with Snowflake, well, wow, I mean, Snowflake, fantastic as it is, right, isn't a totally complete platform. You have a choice. You have enormous choice indeed of what tooling to bring on top of it to do pipeline development. Could be DBT, could be Talend or Informatica or Python, or, there's such an amazing spectrum that you can bring to it, and it all works fine. But they're all very raw tools, and you need this wrapped in some sort of developer environment, what people call an SDLC, a software development lifecycle. That's a bit of a posh way of putting it, isn't it? But it's true. You need some environment for developers to live in, right? And that's, I think, where DataOps for Snowflake is the preeminent product for Snowflake, because you got in early, you have exploited some of the amazing features of Snowflake to help deliver that SDLC, the zero copy clone thing, that when you set up a branch and it creates a whole new environment just for one developer with a warehouse and a zero copy clone of the data. Once people get that about DataOps, they can see value almost. That's the starting point, but it really then brings it home to you what's being added. Yeah,
it's funny you reference SDLC, and I used to say to my team, because I used to do a little pun off of DDL. I used to call it DDLC, right? Data Development Lifecycle. that's you had said something to me, not today, but in preparing for today's show. You had said one thing that really stood out about data ops: politely makes people adopt best practices. What did you mean by that?
People like to develop. There's somebody told me actually once, when as part of a very large group of people, we were being transferred from one company to another, and there was a grieving process going on, and they actually brought some people in to help us through this grieving process. And one of the things they said to us was, when you're in a job, you're in one of three states. You're either a learner, which is great because you feel you're developing yourself. You're a passenger, or you're a prisoner. Right? You don't want to be a prisoner. Is somebody who feels so trapped that they don't even think they could get another job because they don't think they're worthy enough. Right. Learning and developing yourself, right, and considering yourself to becoming a better practiced person, or a person who's a better practitioner, is a very motivating thing. And when it's put on a plate for you, like DataOps gives you on top of Snowflake, you quickly realize that actually, rather than just being able to sort of waffle to people or put something a bit summary into your CV, you're actually able to really talk with confidence and really, some real substance about how you've learned through just the way DataOps works, right? It's just showing it, right? It's just showing the best way to do things, or certainly a very good way to do things. I'm not saying it's the only way, but I think it's, broadly speaking, it is really good practice. And to be able to say you've been there and done it, and actually you appreciate what it really is, I think is very, very powerful. And the opposite is that people fumble about for a long time, and actually their pipelines break, and they've got a tremendous mess on their hands. Well, the worst thing in data, right, is that you don't just have to fix the software; you have to fix the data that got screwed up by the bad software, right? Yeah. So I've seen teams, and it's very sad to say, right, where they're burning out, they're working all the hours, they're up in the middle of the night, they're working all through the weekends, right? And this is not for one particular big milestone they're trying to achieve. This is the norm, right? Well, those teams, it's just sad, right, as well as dreadful. It's not good for the company, but it's particularly not good for the people in the team.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they vote with their feet, right? They walk off, right?
Yeah.
You can't live like that. So that's the fiery hell of the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Yeah. I just think DataOps is so helpful at simply being there for you, to be part of, to be in, right? And it just sort of looks after you in a way, but it also develops you.
I know when I was implementing Snowflake. So before I came to DataOps, I was actually in the field for many years implementing Snowflake before I found DataOps. And what is the norm, and maybe you're seeing it, people tend to take the DevOps solutions, as you talked about, and morph them in, get them to try to work for DataOps. What does adopting DataOps.live bring to an organization versus, well, let me just use these other tools
building it itself? Yeah, it's a build versus buy thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, when people do this a lot, and where it's a very unique situation, maybe fair enough, right? But what Gartner, ISG, Forrester are now very clearly saying, right, is that the idea of using DataOps so DevOps in a data environment, right, has resulted in people bringing to market some products which do that, and it's all there integrated for you. Somebody's tested all of the integrations between the different component parts for you. They've done it for many, many customers, so it's been hardened, right, productionized, whatever you want to call it. So the idea that you then go and build all of that yourself when it's actually already available, right, is, I think it is a bit questionable, because, like, why are you in the job you're in? Is it really to build one of those, or is it to build some solutions, for your business actually needs? If you can buy in something, and the value that DataOps provides, right, it's hard to argue, right, that you would actually spend more by buying the product. It's no, for me, it's a slam dunk. It's a no-brainer, because no longer are DataOps products a really rare idea. They are going mainstream. And if you look at what Gartner is saying about DataOps as a marketplace, I think there's a market analysis report, isn't there, or two, and DataOps gets a very good showing in those things, quite rightly. It's demonstrating that, this is a mature product area now.
You brought up a good point, and I experienced this, right? When I first got into Snowflake and going towards the cloud, we were, I'm gonna say, forced to adopt, the infrastructure as code mentality of things going to the cloud, right? The way we deployed things to Oracle, Teradata years ago, didn't hold true. And our developers are by nature, they love to develop, right? And they're like, oh, we can build this. But yeah, we spent 3 months on this building a good enough solution. And I say good enough because it did the bare minimum. And those were data engineers, not DevOps people, right? Because we had data team. And they took away from being able to, like your point, deliver business value, right?
You're actually slowing yourselves down ultimately, aren't you? So the consequences ultimately are slower time to value, because you can't get good products out as fast as you used to be able to, because you're spending time worrying about the environment and making sure that the latest version of Terraform or Git or whatever it might be, right, still works
that's just it. Just when you get it working, right, Terraform changes something, or Airflow changes something, or Git goes and adds a new feature, and you can't keep up, right? When you're stitching all these tools together, you're in just this endless upgrade and modification.
You've got two layers going on here, because you've got all the use cases that you've been developing anyway as as data products for your business, and you've got to have a way of keeping on top of those while you still want to move forward, right? So you're nevertheless you're going to have an overhead looking after all that stuff. So you want a tool, you want that environment in which you can basically see how those things are performing. You can check their cost and all those sort of good production-y things that we talked about earlier. And then there's another layer below that, which if you were building it yourself, right, you've then got the maintenance and integration checks and all the rest of it for the actual software development environment. Well, you can buy your way out of that very, very cheaply, and allow someone else to take that heavy lifting for you and just deliver it as a product.
It doesn't take long to find the ROI in it, that's for sure.
No,
before we got on the show, we were having another conversation. I'm going to bring it back. We're in the world of AI, right? And everybody wants to go faster. They want to use AI. If you don't have these foundational, like, how does that impact your ability to go towards AI?
Well, AI it's so powerful, right, that when we were talking earlier about correctness, what was previously good enough, right? If good enough, i.e. not perfect, is given to AI, you have that thing where, if you're a tiny bit out when you're navigating a ship, just a short distance, that's fine, right? You'll find the port on the other side of the strait, like going from England to the Isle of Wight or something. But if you're out by half a degree and you're going across the Atlantic, you end up in the wrong country.
Right.
It's like, and that's what AI is like. It will be that value and that insight from the data is so powerful, and it draws on that data so to such a keen degree, right, that if the data's not anything other than pretty damn good, you're potentially going to get insights from AI, which, hopefully you would spot that you thought they were mad, but that's not necessarily the case, is it? because it's much more nuanced than that. It's recommendations around how much stock to buy, and when to buy it, and that sort of thing, which is the sort of thing that we're dealing with some of our customers. When
Yeah,
these are lines they buy in, and then if they don't sell, they have to sell them on to the sort of outlets that take ends of lines and make no money from it at all. Or else the other extreme, right? They don't buy enough, and then everybody wants to buy something that there isn't any stock for. So,
I've had conversations with a few people who are very much involved in building models, training models. And when you're hearing them talk about the models being 70% accurate, oh, 80% accurate, that's
mm, mm,
amazing. Well, then you start asking, well, which use case is 80% accurate good enough, right? Maybe for a call center but to your point, if you want to do something that's
yep.
making a fiscal decision by it, we got to get that number
I'm
better,
one of those
right?
people that I have to say, I suppose maybe because I'm a bit older, right? That I think data should advise. You shouldn't let it be the be all and end all, right? There are
Right.
very good people out there who've got years of experience. Their intuition, their gut, is telling them
Yeah.
one thing. AI should be challenging, okay,
Yeah.
but it isn't necessarily. Well, you shouldn't hand over the keys to the
You,
palace
you
to
know,
the
it's funny you
steps.
said your gut, right?
Mm.
So here in the States, like Major League Baseball,
Hmm.
and you will hear certain managers say they're very analytics driven, and then you have some that
Okay.
are, I've
Yeah.
been in baseball for years, I just know, right? And then they'll make a certain decision, right? To your point, and they'll sit there and say, well, the analytics told me
Mm.
that I should bunt or something
Mm.
like that, right? And they were way off. So it's funny that you said that, my gut, and maybe it's that balance, right, between AI and gut and
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. I think so.
So it's
There's so many different factors on there in modeling, and they don't stay the same. There are
yeah,
new factors sometimes as well. So yeah, you have to be pretty creative actually to get some of this right and
yeah.
think about how the world's changing.
So before we completely end,
Hmm.
I have one last question, or one from you is, if you could give one piece of advice to teams starting on their Snowflake journey, what would that be?
Yeah, and well, I thought about this, and I think basically the at the outset you need to really try to embrace a data ops approach. Okay, what does that mean though? That means at the outset, when people are champing at the bit and demanding to see some results, right, that you choose something pretty simple, but which will be impactful as your immediate first delivery. And then demonstrate the data ops approach of actually building that out from being an MVP into something grander over time. Because you'll then demonstrate, you'll keep dropping more value, right? And you'll be demonstrating that a small increment retains quality, delivers new value. There's always something new coming out. When I was with the software company, the startup one that did project management software, and we did a 2 weekly sprint cycle. It might not have been, it might not have seemed like very much at the time, but every 2 weeks we were dripping, dripping, dripping more value into the product and more things for people to look at. And it was never anything, hugely amazing and cataclysmic, right? Occasionally there was a big drop or something. But when you look back over many weeks or months, right, you realize just what amazing journey you've come on. And you've taken people with you. You've shown them the value. You keep delivering that value, but you haven't dropped the quality. And the quality of the product still as good as it was way back when you started at the first release. So set yourself off on that path. I think people like ourselves are very happy to help with our experience of that sort of thing and help guide people and maybe be that sort of critical friend where you bounce some ideas around and stuff, and then we obviously can help technically to deliver it as well. But
Yep.
yeah, fundamentally,
Great.
that data ops approach.
Well, Peter, it's been a pleasure having you on. We ran out of time because I'm sure you and I could talk for another half hour or more, but it's a pleasure having you on.
Thank you very much. It's been
Yeah,
a pleasure talking to you, Keith.
great. And for everybody, thanks for joining us. Thanks everybody for watching. And today, remember, good enough data is not AI ready data. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.